I'm Jerry Reeves. I came into this country 54 years ago. Was studying in Louisiana, was hired at Washington State University in the Animal Sciences Department as a reproductive physiologist. I fell in love with this country. Was away from people. I worked in a university setting. The family that owned this property, I befriended their son Charlie, and he brought me hunting out here. And so basically, one day they asked me, there was 150 acres for sale out here, and a fellow from an American who was in the military in Germany wanted to sell it for $100 an acre. And so I said, sure, I was interested in buying it. And basically it was primarily for hunting. At least I'd have a place to go hunting. So basically we raised Angus Simmental cattle until approximately the early 1990s. Our university has a program that encouraged development of products for Pacific Rim countries such as Japan, and they knew the quotas and tariffs were going to be taken off of beef going into Japan in 1991, and that Japan could only produce 1/3 of the meat that it needed. And so that opened it up for Australia and the U.S. to try and corner the other 2/3 of the market. So they sent 3 of us to Japan to evaluate the Wagyu market and see what it was, how the state of Washington could take advantage of that market, since we're the closest state in the U.S. to Japan. And when we were over there, and I'd never heard of Wagyu before, but saw the meat, and like any American, thought our product was the best. But after I saw that product, I quickly understood the Japanese had a different type of cattle. They didn't eat as much meat as we did, but the meat they did eat was of a higher quality, and I'm sure if that's what they would like. And saw that they actually crossed their Wagyu with their Holstein cattle, so they produced an F1 product there. And we came back to the U.S. Trying to develop this market of producing an F1 product, but we needed their genetics. And so we had a Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. He had been an ambassador to Japan, was Speaker of the House of Washington, D.C., and was from Spokane, a politician that really helped us get the Wagyu into the U.S. We were the only country worldwide that got the cattle in. The Australians knew better what we had than we did, and they quickly exported cattle. The Wagyu cattle we were bringing in here, they were buying a lot of them and taking them to Australia because they wanted to compete for the market too. And so that market went. We were breeding Angus cattle here in the U.S., primarily heifers, feeding it here, slaughtering it here, and shipping the meat to Japan. And Australia had about 1/3 of the market, and we had 1/3, and the Japanese produced enough on their own for 1/3. But what happened in 2003, mad cow disease hit here in the state of Washington from a cow that we had brought out of Canada. And so the Japanese stopped all meat going into Japan out of the U.S. And so all of a sudden, we didn't have that market. And our cattlemen didn't really care for the looks of the Wagyu, and our consumer knew nothing about it. They'd heard of Kobe beef, but they didn't know what Wagyu was. And so we had to sell that meat back into the U.S. consumer or restaurants at probably 60 cents on the dollar. We had a lot of meat that was only cut for Japan, and the Japanese slaughter plants, didn't even know how to make hamburger. And so we had to go in and show them how to make hamburger. A lot of those cuts that were going to Japan were put into hamburger, sold back into the U.S. Within about 1.5 to 2 years, then the restaurant people saw that this meat was better than what they had been getting, let's say, from certified Angus. And the market then started turning around. And since that time, right now, the best market in the world for Wagyu meat is the United States. The consumer understands what it is, and they're paying for it. And so that's kind of a little bit of a history on the Wagyu. We registered our first calf in 1990, a half-blood calf, and have built our herds up as full-blood and purebred. The full-blood, all the ancestry comes out of Japan. The purebred, we've come up out of Angus cows to over 15-16, so over a 93.75% Wagyu. And the advantage of that is that we've been able to bring the polled gene along, get rid of the horns, and possibly have brought some other genes along that give our cattle a little more disease resistance than we see from the straight Japanese cattle. How we got into the Wagyu, I mean, we had the land, we raised Wagyu on this land here. They're not necessarily pets, some of them are to my daughter, but you can see it's very rough country. And we don't help the cows calve, they have to bring a calf in on their own. And only real predator we have are cougars, and they sometimes give us problems. But just a cow to survive on this takes a pretty stout animal. And so we think we've got some of the best Wagyu cattle outside of Japan, and we think our cattle are tougher because they've had to be 30 years surviving on this type of a landscape. They don't have a backyard or irrigated pasture or anything like that.
Hi, my name is Arlie Reeves, and I was born and raised on this ranch. Growing up on a ranch, I feel like kids have a lot of responsibilities, and so I grew up helping my parents with the cattle and the land, and really grew to develop a fondness for it, a love for the cattle and a love for ranching. The Wagyu are really special cattle and a really special breed, and as I've grown up here and moved on into my adulthood, I've just really grown to carry on what my parents have started. My husband and I, Taylor, we have our own cattle that we run with our parents, and that's been something that's really evolved into a love that both he and I share, and I'm really grateful to have a husband that is so involved in the family ranch and so dedicated to taking it forward with me. They're very special to us. I think I might get attached a little bit more than I probably should, but we are really keen on advancing the genetics that my parents have built. We're keen on selecting for the polled gene because there's a lot of reasons the polled genetics for animal welfare reasons are just a better animal. So we're really excited to be continuing the ranching legacy. And do you want to tell the story?
Yeah. So Arlie told me that if I didn't propose to her soon, she was going to propose to me. So I got to get on the ball there. And anyway, so when I proposed to her in May of 2022, it was down here at the bottom where the corrals are, and in exchange for a ring, she gave me a newborn heifer. So I had my own heifer to start with there, and so I've had that one ever since, and we're just trying to like keep adding to our own herd, and yeah.
And I think one of the keys of our mission for ranching and what we're building here is not just great cattle and great Wagyu genetics, but also being transparent with our ranching practices and advocating for agriculture. So we want to advocate for agriculture, increase transparency within what we do in agriculture and ranching, and kind of build a social media platform where we can build relationships with people outside of ranching and relationships with consumers, so that consumers can have a direct relationship to a ranch like ours. And I think that will build a better understanding of what we do in helping feed the world. So we're in the middle of winter prep right now. So yesterday we moved some cattle around. Today we're moving more, and behind us are our loadout chutes. And so we practice low stress animal handling, which is really important to us just to ensure safety of the animals and safety of those working the animals. So this bud box behind us, a bud box is kind of a rectangular shaped corral there. And what it does is it encourages low stress animal handling. When the cattle come down the yard, they go into this rectangle, the gate closes behind them, and the person in there walks past the cattle, and the cattle naturally want to avoid them, so they run back and into the chute to load on the trailer. It doesn't work perfectly every time, but as they get used to it, it's a very natural way of loading cattle up into trailers in a low stress handling way. So our primary focus at Bar R Wagyu is the genetics component. We specialize in producing quality breeding stock, semen, embryos, and we also have a bull lease program. So our goal is to produce the highest quality Wagyu animals, both full blood and pulled purebred. We look at a variety of different genetic factors, so we're looking at genomically enhanced EPDs when we're making breeding selections. We look at the cattle, we know our cattle, we know which type of cattle run well on our tough terrain and which cattle we should continue to breed and select for. We primarily look at marbling as a carcass trait and carcass weight, and those are our two primary focus areas for the genomic enhanced EPDs when we're making those breeding selections. We rely heavily on real data that we get from our bulls, either through our bull lease program or actual progeny testing, and so that real data just affirms the genomic enhanced EPDs that we're looking at to make breeding selections. And genetic side of things is definitely our bread and butter, and we're really passionate about it and always trying to find ways to make that next best bull, that next best cow.
These are the four original bulls that came in 1975 by Morris Whitney. And we call this the old genetics. There was Mazda, Fuji, Rushaw, Judo, 2 brown or red Wagyu and 2 black. There were no cows brought in the 70s, and these were the 4 original. And Morris Whitney, who brought these cattle in with a partner out of Japan, actually went broke, and he lost all the family money trying to promote the Wagyu cattle in the 70s. This is the same time that the continental cattle come out of Europe, the Charolais, the Simmental, the Brandvet, Gelbvieh. At that time, the Americans were looking for large, growthy, muscular cattle and not high marbling cattle. And so he was before his time. These are some bulls we raised here that were fairly high in the old EPDs. In 1993, the first new imports came in from World K, and these are descendants of those animals. So we've got the old genetics came in the 70s. New genetics came in the 90s, from about 93 to 99. There was probably 30 bulls brought in and probably 200 cows. Well, the question is about EPDs. EPDs is an acronym for expected progeny differences. The Americans use this terminology to evaluate the animal's potential performance in the future. So Australians use expected breeding values, EBVs, so they're easy to confuse, but they essentially get you in the same type of concept in which we're using the ancestral history of an animal, its sire and its dam and ancestors, to predict how well they'll do in a particular trait. For example, in the Wagyu cattle, it's marbling is the #1 trait. And now we can basically look at offspring from animals and predict how they're going to do. But a young animal's EPD is based primarily on the ancestral data plus a new concept, which is genomically enhanced EPDs, in which they look at the entire genome and use that to enhance the already developed EPD, ancestral EPD. And so it's somewhat confusing, but basically the association puts out a histogram grid in which there's a line through the middle showing the average, and your animal's either above average or below average. And they have actual numbers for these EPDs, but the percentage grids are better because you don't have to remember what the number is. You can say this animal's in the top 10% or this animal's in the bottom 80% of the breed. And so we're using that right now as an indicator in how we select animals. And primarily that's not but what we've always used. And so, since we got into the Wagyu, and Washington State University started the EPDs and the Wagyu back in the 90s. And the associations have dropped those, but they've started new EPDs, which are probably better, but we've been following the EPDs, whether they were done by Washington State University or wagyubeef or Bob Estrin or the American Wagyu Association. So we're trying to use all the data we can in how we select the future animals. We really feel that we put most of the selection pressure on the bulls. And of course the cow is half of the puzzle, but we put all the pressure on the bulls and we can select from them because we got more data on them. The other thing that's happening in the Wagyu breed, they have genetic defects which we can pick up in the DNA, and we're trying to select against those genetic defects. There's about 5 of them known, and we don't cull any of the cows for having those defects, but we do go and we only select and use bulls that are genetic defect free as far as we can tell. And so over time, I would guess, for example, one defect is called factor 11. It's a blood clotting factor. And when we started, it looked like the breed was about 46% of the breed had factor 11. I don't know what percent has it now, but in our herd, we're down around 14 or 15%. So we've gotten rid of it by not culling any cows, but only using bulls that are free of that particular defect. The EPDs we focus on in the last couple of years have been first marbling, and secondly carcass weight. The two things that we get paid on. And third, we'd look at feed efficiency. And so we do a feed efficiency trial in a commercial feedlot where they have what's called grow safe systems, where they can measure the amount of feed that the bulls eat each time they go to the feed bunk. And they weigh the animal each time they go to drink water. And so over a 70-day period, we know the amount of feed that they take in and the weight they gain. So typical feed efficiency is feed in, weight gain, but we don't always use that because size affects the results. We use what's called residual feed intake. And there's feed used for maintenance, body maintenance, heat. There's feed that goes into growth, weight gain, and then there's feed that goes not used for maintenance or growth. We call this residual feed. you might think of it as feed that just goes through the animal with no purpose. And so we're trying to select animals that have a lower residual feed intake, wasting feed that's not used in their body. So we talk about a term called RFI. RFI in the cattle industry is important these days. And so it's a type of feed efficiency, and that's what we're selecting our animals. Probably the third criteria we're looking at. First, marbling, carcass weight, which would be growth, and then feed efficiency. This barn is 8 years old. We built it for our first cattle sale. And in this barn, we actually stack our hay so they work like a grandstand, and the people bidding can sit on the hay. And the auctioneer is up here, and we have 4 large TV sets, and we've already filmed the animals, so they don't come in the barn. But we can scan this out over the internet, and people can bid that aren't here. They can actually bid from Australia or Europe. And the cattle don't come in the barn, but we're auctioned like a typical auction. We don't have an auction every year, we have one every other year. And so we built this barn primarily for our auction, but we store hay in it. And now it's just as important for our hay as it is for the auction.
Focus in our business is the genetic side of the Wagyu business. So we primarily focus on raising quality breeding animals, females and males. Embryos, semen, those kind of things are our primary focus. We do have a small meat program. The meat program is kind of secondary in our focus. We do feel it's really important to have that direct-to-consumer business model as well. But our passion really is that genetic side of things, selecting based on EPDs and being able to look at the cattle and understand what type of cattle run best in our area, and helping others determine what type of lines and selection practices they need to be making for their own Wagyu programs around the country or around the world. So that's really where our passion is the genetic side of it. There's always new science, new data behind it, and so that really keeps us invigorated to try and find that next piece of selection, whether it's selecting against new genetic defects or trying to build on feed efficiency gains, things like that. So really passionate about the science side of things. Our meat side of things, we're small. We process about 20 to 24 head of Wagyu cattle a year for beef. And the meat side of things is a completely different business than raising cattle and ranching. The challenges are different than what we face out here. And it's been really fun to dip our feet into that and to continue to grow our customer base for our beef. We started out usually selling a whole carcass or a half carcass, and now we primarily sell beef boxes, anywhere from 5 to 20 pound boxes, and that allows us to sell to more customers and get more people exposed to the Wagyu and the awesome beef that it produces, and it allows us to meet a lot of people and really keep that connection to the consumer strong, which I feel is important, because what we're really doing at the end of the day is raising cattle for beef and to feed the world, whether it's through the breeding stock that we sell to others who then produce the beef. I mean, it's a kind of full ecosystem that we're trying to sustain here. So we really enjoy it. It's, ranching is a lifestyle. It's not a job, and so everything we do is for the environment, for the cows, for the ecosystem, for our families, and for the consumers.